Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here this morning for the launch of PopCon. Let me start by a quick housekeeping announcement. Can you make sure your mobile phones are switched off? We would not want that to in any way overshadow Steve Bray serenading us from outside. And I should also say that although this event this morning is about policy and politics, we should start, of course, by sending our very best wishes to His Majesty the King. We all wish him a full and swift recovery. For those of you who don't know me, well, and in fact for those of you who do know me, my name's Mark Littlewood, and I'm thrilled to take on the role as the first director of this new initiative, Popular Conservatism. Now, I know what will be crossing your mind. What can this guy be thinking? Does this man not read the opinion polls? Does he have no grasp of public opinion at all? Isn't this the most unpropitious time imaginable to launch a new group with the words popular and conservatism in its name? All very fair questions. So I wanted to spell out to you why I think it is both a vital and ideal time to kickstart this initiative, and why I am genuinely, boundlessly optimistic about what popular conservatism can achieve. So I hope you don't mind if I take a few minutes of your time before we get to our stellar roster of speakers to spell out a few things. What the PopCons are about, importantly, what we're not about, and what I believe we can achieve in the weeks, months and years ahead. Let me start with the disclaimers, or to clearly signpost what we're not about. This isn't about the leadership of the Conservative Party. William Hague once quipped that the Conservatives are an autocracy tempered by regicide. I don't think he was intending to convey that an ever-increasing appetite for regicide would be conducive to bringing about an ever more conservative Britain. The new movement isn't about the person who leads the Conservatives. As I said in a newspaper column this weekend, I am personally immovable in my view that Rishi Sunak should lead the Conservatives into the next general election. We're not even about the way the Conservative Party should set its own rules and procedures. Many others, in particular I point to the excellent work done by the Conservative Democratic Organisation, the CDO, have come up with some truly excellent proposals for party reform. Again, though, that's not the PopCon wheelhouse. Finally, I know the media have enjoyed talking about the 5 families within the Conservative Party, with barely concealed glee, mischievously inviting comparisons with the 5 families who made up the New York Mafia about a century ago. Why would a 6th family be needed, one might ask? But from what I can understand, the 5 groups thus described are loose networks of MPs, perhaps united in a common cause or a shared analysis of some sort, who come together to discuss how best to make and prosecute their case. I think we should welcome that. It's part of a vibrant political community. But the PopCon movement isn't seeking to replicate or replace any of them. Although we are launching today in Westminster and welcome the support of MPs, we will position ourselves as a genuinely grassroots movement instead. And I'll say a bit more about exactly how we intend to go about that in my closing remarks after we've heard from our speakers. What we are about, what this initiative is about, is communicating and developing a Conservative vision for Britain that can excite the public and channel their hopes, their worries, their aspirations, and indeed their discontentment into a popular and constructive programme for the renewal of the United Kingdom. It was the late President Woodrow Wilson who said that a Conservative is someone who sits and thinks. but mostly sits. Well, friends, it's high time we did some thinking. It's high time we did some analysis. We've had a Conservative-led government for nearly 14 years, under 5 different Prime Ministers. Conservatives have some agreed common ends: lower taxes, a proper functioning market economy, individual liberty. But many of these goals have been proven to be frustratingly elusive. Taxes are at their highest level since the 1940s. State spending is at an all-time high, although very few people seem to think that public services are better than ever. Deficit spending has become the norm. There has been no balanced budget since 2001. The national debt is now so vast that, as Ronald Reagan said, it is big enough to look after itself. Barely a day goes by without some further diktat being proposed or enacted that further restricts freedom of individuals, families and businesses to exercise their own discretion. What you eat and drink, whether you smoke, an issue that's very close to my heart and even closer to my lungs, what you say, perhaps even what you are presumed to think, what type of car you choose to drive, what values you choose to express, what you can watch, how you can spend the money that you have earned. All of these vital areas of life have seen an ever greater role for the apparatus of the state and a shrinking, more straitjacketed role for the individual. And all of this has happened under nearly a decade and a half of Conservative-led government. Why might this be so? Well, it's our contention that we have allowed a hostile, legal, bureaucratic and constitutional system not just to emerge over the past 25 years, but now to become entrenched. The entire institutional framework of the United Kingdom is now firmly geared against achieving the sort of goals that Conservatives share. This doesn't mean there's a coordinated conspiracy, but there is a powerful network of quangos, bureaucrats and state bodies that all seem to share the same sort of leftist groupthink. The OBR pronouncing on their best guess of the so-called fiscal headroom the government might have, although their guesses are typically out by about £53 billion per annum. The Treasury economic modelling still wedded to a static, outdated model of tax and spend. The Climate Change Committee pronouncing on our progress to the eye-wateringly expensive and almost certainly unachievable aim of carbon net zero. Our membership of ECHR and the platoons of lawyers mitigating against almost any form of immigration policy that a democratically elected government might wish to enact. Schools teaching young kids a range of dangerous falsehoods. Wherever you look, the constitutional infrastructure we have allowed to emerge will almost always push for more state spending, higher taxes and more regulation. And the infrastructure is vast and very powerful. In such an environment, achieving shared Conservative ends can feel like an exercise in pushing water uphill. Occasional victories are possible. Indeed, sometimes substantial victories can be achieved. But the inexorable tide, the current in the water, the flow of the waves, these are all against us. You sometimes ask yourself, in 2024 Britain, whether we are really governed by our elected government at all, or whether we are largely at the mercy of a network of state agencies, quangos, lawyers and bureaucrats to whom we are obliged to answer, but can rarely influence and even more rarely remove. The PopCon proposition is that it is simply not enough to will the Conservative ends of lower taxes, a more vibrant growing economy in a sovereign country where millions of individuals and families pursue their own lives largely unimpeded by the state. You can't just will those ends. You have to will the means. And that will require a complete overhaul of the machinery of the state and a great restoration of British democratic and constitutional principles. We have seen how things just don't work and aren't fair under the structure of quangos, now numbering 500 or so, and commissions that have grown into the sprawling state. We don't merely have a powerful bureaucratic elite that is unresponsive to public opinion, and ordinary people. We have a class of people in that elite who are not merely aloof from the public, but often dismissive, even sneering about ordinary people's beliefs and attitudes. Of course, a swathe of establishment bodies sought for years to thwart Brexit, despite a majority voting for it. Only a general election, finally empowering the people to decide once more, finally got Brexit done. Or take the Post Office and the Horizon scandal, perhaps the biggest miscarriage of justice in British judicial history, but also probably the longest, dragging on over decades. So unresponsive was the state infrastructure that hundreds of decent people suffered so badly, many dying before receiving any form of justice. Had this happened in the private sector, there would have been more than the handing back of a single CBE. Heads would have rolled, and quickly. People may well have gone to prison, not the innocent sub-post office masters, but those who so mercilessly and cruelly persecuted them. So unresponsive to ordinary British people and workers was our current bureaucratic system that it took not a state inquiry or a parliamentary question to get to the bottom of the scandal, but an ITV drama series. Thanks and congratulations to ITV, but they should not be needed as a constitutional backstop in such circumstances. So perhaps oddly, at an event such as this, I'm going to quote the late, great Tony Benn. His key questions to those in authority were, what power have you got? Where did you get it from? In whose interest do you exercise it? To whom are you accountable? And how can we get rid of you? In Britain in 2024, the honest answers to those in powerful positions in the state establishment and quangocracy would be as follows. What power have you got? Lots and ever increasing. Where did you get it from? Well, that's largely lost to the mists of time. In whose interest do you exercise it? Typically those who benefit from the prevailing status quo. To whom are you accountable? A range of different international bodies or to Parliament, but largely nominally. How can we get rid of you? With enormous difficulty. A socialist, Tony Benn, may have posed those very fair questions, but it will fall to popular Conservatives to ensure the honest answers become very different in the years ahead. I hope all of you today will join us in making that possible. Thank you very much indeed. And to kick off our stellar lineup of speakers, please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to the former Business Secretary and the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset, the Right Honourable Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg MP. Jacob.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful delight to see so many popular Conservatives, because just by looking at you, I see what popular people you are, and glad that you have come here. Let me start with two quotations. One, you'll have to forgive me, is going to be French, but the first is from Canning, the steady patriot of the world alone, the friend of every country but his own. And the second is from Louis, or if you prefer the traditional English pronunciation, Louis XVI, who said, and I'll have to read this because it is in French, "C'est un grand révolte," to which his friend, courtier Rochefoucauld, Liancourt replied, "Non, sir, c'est un grand revolution." And what do those two quotations tell us? Well, in my view, that there is a grand revolution going on, and it is against those who are steady patriots of the world alone, but not friends of their own country. Electors across the world, not just in the United Kingdom, have realised that the age of Davos man is over, of international cabals and quangos telling millions, hundreds of millions of people how to lead their lives. And if you don't believe me, don't look around this country, but look to France, to Germany, look to Brussels, look to Holland, look to the United States, look to Argentina. Voters have had enough, and they are saying, up with this, I will not put. And what answers do they get? Was it not magnificent to see in a Brexit Britain that the President of France, when faced with farmers saying that this will not do, what does he say? Does he say, I will legislate for it? Does he say, I will issue a Gaullist decree? Does he say, by the power vested in me that comes down from the French kings, I will stop this? Oh no. He says, I will go to Brussels, and I will have a word with the President of the Commission to see if I'm allowed to ameliorate the lot of the French farmer. And so what does the French farmer do? He besieges Paris for the first time since Bismarck. That is what I mean by it is a great revolution. It is not just in this country that people are entirely fed up with this internationalist, unaccountable approach to governing. And there are the bodies that tell us what to do. We have left the EU, but it's still there in so many of our systems. We are tied into the ECHR. Many of you will be concerned about the power grab by the WTO. And that's before WHO, not WTO. And many of you will also be concerned, and I know Lee is going to talk more, about COP and the effect that is having on our economy. There are these bodies that feed into us that limit our freedom for manoeuvre. And what should the response be to that? Well, it is that we have to restore power to our democratic institutions and take it away from those that seek to override democracy. Because the great thing about democracy is the question posed by Mark, how do you get rid of them? That you can vote to get rid of people who don't live up to your expectations. And that allows change and it allows evolution. But we have stultified. It is the great triumph. Now, these are words you thought I would never say. The great triumph of Tony Blair, Sir Anthony Blair, Knight of the Garter, in that when he was in government, it's a great thing to be a Knight of the Garter and to be a follower of St. George. I mean, it is, of course, the society designed for the worship and admiration of St. George, a wonderful part of our historic tradition, and delightful that Tony Blair should feel that he should admire St. George so much. But what was his triumph? His triumph was he set up systems that effectively bound Parliament's successors. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the Human Rights Act. I'm talking about the Climate Change Act. And I'm talking about the Equality Act. Those three major pieces of legislation took power from Parliament and gave it to the bureaucracy and to the judges, because he also set up the Supreme Court. Now, when the Supreme Court was set up, we were told that although it was called supreme, it was no more supreme than the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords. But the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords was part of our historic tradition of a judiciary that was within Parliament. And why does that matter? It matters because the UK does not have a separation of powers. The separation of powers is an American constitutional theory, not a British constitutional theory. We have never had a separation of powers, and until Tony Blair changed it, everything was in Parliament. What was the official title of Parliament? The High Court of Parliament. How were we governed by the King in Parliament? What was in Parliament? The executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. All three parts of our government were within Parliament. They were all therefore part of a system that was ultimately democratically accountable. And Tony Blair took the judges out. And when they were taken out, they decided that was really rather jolly, because they suddenly thought that they could be like the Supreme Court of the United States, and you know all about Chief Justice Marshall. I don't need to go into him and how he turned the Supreme Court of the United States into the ultimate arbiter of what was law in the United States. And that is why in the United States you have a system where the highest decisions of politics are not made by the elected, but are made by the judges. It is the greatest weakness of an otherwise beautiful constitution. And Tony Blair tried to recreate that here, and it has taken away power from the British voter. And we need to reverse that. We need to re-establish the traditional relationship between the judiciary and Parliament. Ideally, we should bring it back into Parliament, because the judges are getting it wrong. They are tied in to this international elite. They are plugged in to the European Convention on Human Rights. Look at that dreadful Rwanda judgment. Why do I say it was dreadful? Well, a British court preferred evidence from the High Commissioner, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, than from His Majesty's government. The same High Commissioner for Refugees that sends people to Rwanda itself. And when you look at the judgment of the Supreme Court, it is full of references to a foreign organisation overriding His Majesty's government. Since when has that been the way that we are governed? It is all part of this international Davos man approach that is being rejected not just in this country, but globally. And this has consequences, because our courts, being weak about this and preferring an international construction of human rights, must share the blame for judges who allow people who throw corrosive substances over people remaining in this country when they have a bogus conversion to Christianity. Now, I'm all in favour of people converting to Christianity. How could I not be? I mean, look at the sign there, look at the sign there. We're in a wonderful Christian place. The more the merrier. It's a great thing. The Catholic Church is a proselytising church. But we don't want people to say that they are Christian, just so that they can stay in this country when they ought to be removed. And we don't want gullible judges believing them because of human rights. We need to bring back the association between the elector and the elected. That is what has been broken in recent years, and it is the judges and the quangos. The quangos are the hangover. They've been at my Somerset cider, I think, and are suffering the hangover of us not being in the European Union. What do I mean by that? They all plugged in to EU lawmaking, and they have been unplugged, and there is this wire waving about in the air that isn't plugged into anything. It's not accountable to Parliament, it's not accountable to government, and it carries on regulating and regulating badly. So why aren't we building the houses we should want to build? Because Natural England is enforcing nutrient neutrality. And that means that my voters can't get houses that they want, because it's being stopped. It's a huge problem in Somerset, but not just in Somerset, across the country, because of unaccountable, unelected quangos. So let's come back to this whole idea of popular conservatism, because this is really about democracy. What do we believe as conservatives? What underpins every view of every conservative? That we put the individual first, not the collective. And what does the socialist do? Puts the collective first, not the individual. And what we have seen Tony Blair so cleverly do was construct the socialist state where the rights of the individual are subject to the collective, and the collective is taken out of the hands of Parliament and put into the hands of wise men. Though no doubt the socialist would say wise people to be politically correct. But I'm going to stick to wise men, and I'm not going to tell you about the Anglo-Saxon origin of the word man. I'll do that on another occasion. And this support for the collective has taken away our individual rights to choose and to be democratically governed. Popular conservatism is about restoring that. And when you hear more about policies, it will all come from that. How do we make people better off? How do we give them more say over their lives? How do we allow this country to be properly run and raise the standard of living for all our voters? By giving them freedom over their lives and taking it away from the unaccountable, the faceless, the bureaucrat, and the pious platitudes of pompous politicians which have been running this country for too long. Popular conservatism is the answer, and we should be a patriot of this nation alone, a friend of every country, but conscious of the one that is ours and whose interests we must put first. Thank you very much.
Jacob, thank you. I only focused on the problems we faced at home, let alone all of the problems we face abroad. Quite a task for our popular Conservatives. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure. We're going to hear from a range of voices from the Conservative Party present, but here's a voice from the Conservative Party future. Please give a very warm welcome to our superb candidate for the constituency of Epsom and Young, Mari Fraser. Mari.
Margaret Thatcher once said, "The right of man to work as he will, to spend what he earns, to buy property, to have the state as servant and not as master, that is the British inheritance. They are the essence of a free economy, and on that freedom, all of our other freedoms depend." And the Conservative Party's 2019 manifesto, the manifesto that delivered us a landslide victory, that saw us get the highest share of the popular vote since Margaret Thatcher came into power, that manifesto specifically said, we as Conservatives want to give you freedom. But time is running out for us to deliver that freedom, because it certainly cannot be found in the smoking ban for anyone born after the 1st of January 2009. Which will create a ludicrous two-tier system where in years to come, a 50-year-old man will be able to legally buy a packet of cigarettes, but his 49-year-old wife will not. And it's certainly not found in continued plans to ban multi-buy deals on sugary foods, meaning a grown adult can commit that cardinal sin of buying 2 packets of biscuits, but cannot benefit from the lowest prices. And the irony is, nanny state policies do not take care of us. There is internationally no defining correlation between increased controls on tobacco and lower smoking rates. Likewise, no defining correlation between controls on food sales and increased health and longevity. In reality, the nanny state causes more harm than good. Conservative policies are meant to be economically sound, but sin taxes increase prices and disproportionately affect people on the lowest of incomes. Ever-increasing numbers of regulations inhibit competition and innovation. And the creation of spurious crimes for activity that would never previously have been considered close to criminal takes the police away from dealing with serious crime and creates black markets in illicit goods that only benefit criminal gangs. And once one freedom is surrendered, other freedoms follow, because the state is no Mary Poppins. So where do we stop? The Independent National Food Strategy Review, commissioned by the government, recommended that we would have to cut our meat consumption by 30% over the next decade to meet our climate and biodiversity targets. Are we to see sin taxes on steak in penance for our presence on this planet? And what about that most British of pastimes, drinking? After the tobacco ban was announced, pressure groups started lobbying the government to follow that policy in other areas and to take bolder, braver steps to prevent harm from other risk factors such as alcohol. one of the most pernicious consequences of outright bans like that on smoking is that regulations introduced after that point will seem moderate in comparison. If you complain in the future about the increasing restrictions on your ability to drink, you'll get a slap on the wrist and you'll be told that you're lucky to be able to drink at all. Because let us never forget the nanny in her most monstrous form. The COVID lockdowns, which saw the greatest attack on personal liberties under peacetime conditions that this country has ever seen, in return for very limited public health benefits. As a result, we have suffered immeasurable economic, social, health and psychological harm, but we were conditioned to be grateful because finally we got to leave the house and go for dinner with our families and friends. There is a better way. We need to be brave in calling for policies that deliver that freedom, because the more free a country, the more happy and prosperous its people. We need to be championing the free market to encourage competition and innovation. Cutting regulations to reduce the role of the state, to create a smaller one that defends the freedoms of the British people and does not curtail them. And we need to be slashing the crippling tax burden to encourage spending and supercharge much-needed economic growth. The British people are individuals, not toys of public policy. I trust the British public to make the right decisions for themselves and for their families far more than I trust the bloated state. And if those decisions involve life's smallest of pleasures, a slice of cake, a cigarette after a long day at work, a large glass of wine or whiskey, then it's time to put nanny to bed.
Mark Reid, thank you so much. Our next speaker will be known to you all and is going to speak about carbon net zero and how a big, heavy-handed state has not proven to be popular. Please join me in welcoming the former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, the Member of Parliament for Ashfield, Lee Anderson. Lee.
Well, thank you. I do recognise some people in here, actually. Well, look, when I first got elected to Parliament in 2019, I thought I was going to come down and tear it apart and do great things, and it's not really turned out that way. It's been hampered by COVID and all sorts of stuff. But when I go in that place over there, I think about the place that I was born, which is Ashfield. It's the place that I live. It's a place I've never lived more than 5 miles from the place I was born. So I go to my local pub on a Saturday afternoon, sometimes a Sunday as well, and I talk to my friends in there and regulars, and we talk about politics. They say, the first thing they'll say is, Lee, we're not going to talk about politics, and then we'll spend the next 4 hours talking about politics. That's just what they do. And one of the big problems is this net zero. Now, I've been knocking on doors, like many colleagues in here for donkey's years, talking to people on the doorstep, and it never comes up once on the doorstep. You might get the odd weirdo in the corner with the Green candidate who's got about 20 votes. He might just start banging on about it, but you soon cross him off your list. But it never comes up on the doorstep. But when you actually ask the question, do you want to leave the planet in a better place than when you arrived here, they all say yes, of course we do, because I think all of us are environmentalists. We all love our planet. We're guardians of, in the short period of time that we're here, we are guardians of the planet, and we want to make sure that when we leave this place, it's in a good state for our children and our grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, because that should be our job. Now, I think to myself, how many, as politicians in that place over there, Parliament, how many MPs and Lords and whoever lie awake at night worrying about their next gas bill or their electric bill, or have they got 20 quid to put in the van to get to work the following day? How many literally over there worry about that? And then how many people, think about how many people in Ashfield lie awake at night thinking about worrying whether or not we'll get to net zero in 2050. I tell you what, it's not many. It's not many at all. I suspect the figure in both instances is pretty similar. It's fairly low. That's unless you're an MP that wants a job in green energy after a life in politics. But we won't go there. What my constituents do worry about is their fuel bills. They worry about the cost of gas, the cost of electric, and like I say, filling the cars up. They genuinely worry about that. They do not chase me down the street saying, Lee, I'm not voting for you this next time because you're not sorted out carbon emissions. What they do say is, I'm struggling to vote for you next time because you're not sorted out our fuel bills. They are astronomical. It's absolutely, it's a shocker. But people, you know, people in this country, great country of ours, they're not stupid. Sometimes we treat them like they're stupid, and they're not. They see the massive changes that we've made in this country over the past 30, 40 years, 50 years maybe, with reducing carbon emissions. And I like to harp on back to my childhood. I had a happy childhood, and me and Jacob's got one thing in common here. We was both born on estates. He's a country estate. And yes, I was born on a council estate. It's slightly different. But when I used to walk up to school in the 1970s, it was probably a mile and a half away. The coal mine was next door. I'd walk up to school with my sisters. And the one thing that we took for granted was that the air was always thick. It was thick with smog and smoke because every single house that we passed had a chimney, had a coal fire. Every man worked at the pit. Every single house in the village had a connection to the local coal mine. So you'd walk up and all the smoke would be puthering out and it'd be horrible, you'd be coughing. Then you'd walk past the public library, that'd have a coal heating system in. Then you'd walk past a GP surgery, again, coal. Then you get to school and the first thing you noticed in the school playground was a big heap of coking coal under the headmaster's office, and that was our heating. And then the hospital, every single public building was run on coal. But now, I mean, I walked on the same street last week in Ashfield, the same route up to my school, and in January, the sky was blue. It was not a cloud in the sky. It was absolutely blue. And I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, that would not have happened in my village back in the 70s. It would have been thick, it would have been foggy, it would have been absolutely horrible. So we are making massive strides, and I think we need to pat ourselves on the back for that, and that's not really come at an enormous cost, I don't think, in people's bills until now. People are really starting to see the pinch in the bills at the moment. So, yeah, a big slap on the back, I think, for us for moving away from coal. Now, I've got an interest in this because probably some of you will know that I am an ex-coal miner, and I'm one of these people that want to see our pits open. I want us to see us frack. I just don't understand how we've got into a situation. Take, for example, Radcliffe Power Station. It's just down the road from me, just a few miles. Now, when I worked at Welbeck Colliery in Nottinghamshire, we used to send coal to this power station to heat up the East Midlands to make the electricity. Now it's a dual-fuel power station, and it burns gas most of the time. But, hey presto, I mean, last year gas was so expensive, they had to switch to coal. Now, they weren't burning coal from Welbeck Colliery, where I used to work, because it's shut. They were burning coal from abroad. What a load of nonsense that is. We're burning coal in our power stations, but it's foreign coal that comes over on big tankers. What about, I mean, how's that contributing to net zero? It's an absolute nonsense, and yeah, it gets me very, very angry. But then I look further north into Yorkshire at Drax Power Station. Now, Drax Power Station, it used to have a coal mine just a few miles away, maybe 10 miles away. The coal was produced from the coal mine and straight to Drax Power Station, into there, and produced electricity for the great people of Yorkshire. But what's happened now? We closed the pit, and it's now burning wood pellets. These wood pellets come from America, North America, and they are brought over again. Millions of tons of these wood pellets are brought over on diesel-guzzling tankers, and then they pulverised into a powder, into a dust, and then we set fire to it to make electricity. We're chopping trees down, we're growing trees, and chopping them down, shipping them halfway across the world to put into a power station that used to take coal from a coal mine 10 miles away. And they say this these wood pellets are sustainable because they're trees. We can grow them again. Now, I'm pretty sure that coal 100 million years ago was trees and plants. Is that right, Jacob? It was. So I would argue that that's sustainable. So, I mean, there we are. Frack gas. We have an abundance of gas in this country under our feet, yet we are importing frack gas from America. I don't understand it. I really don't. Where we can tap down. And again, this is where that place over there where we work, the politicians are out of touch with the general public. They really are. Because if you give people the choice, cheaper gas, frack gas, I'm pretty sure they would take it. Now, most people get up in the morning and go and switch the light on or put the kettle on or run a shower. They're not really interested where that electricity or that gas is from. They just want to have a nice cup of tea, a bit of breakfast, shower and get on their way. You know, if we can supply that at a much cheaper level, then everybody's a winner. But like I say, people aren't really bothered where it comes from, apart from the odd environmentalist and that lot, you know, over there. I don't like talking about my colleagues like that, but I get very angry that us, you know, I don't have to worry about paying my gas bill or electric bill. I haven't got a clue what my direct debit is for my energy bills. But I know little old ladies on my street, they're absolutely furious. They're counting every single penny. So when we're making decisions over there, we should be making them not for us, but for the people we represent. And I think sometimes we forget about that. There is a bit of a solution to this, because I've been working on a project with the Coal Authority. And there's a scheme up and running now up in Durham, which is using old mine workings. Now, the old mine, there's thousands of miles of underground tunnels in this country, and these have been filled with water. And the water heats up, and the Coal Authority have got this scheme in place now where you draw the water out, you put it through an heat exchanger, you can do that by green energy if you want to, and they use it for district heating to heat whole housing estates, and it's up and running in Durham, and it's providing cheap, sustainable energy, which can be net zero, which is brilliant. So I'm hoping that government will listen and try and roll that out, or encourage that to be put into local plans, you know, when we're building houses and developments in the country. So that is one positive on the net zero journey. But when I go into my local pub and mention COP28, and I say, what do you think of COP28? And they will say to me, that's a load of rich people, politicians, movie stars, celebrities, flying into an exotic country in private jets to tell poor people they've got to pay for the mistakes that they have made. And it's that simple. And they hate it. They absolutely detest it. And I can't argue with that, because they see these people in the private jets, pulling up in the limousines, you know, and you know, preaching this. It's not nonsense, because we all want to get to net zero, but they're telling poorer people in my community that you must pay for this. Now, the green levies on bills is what, 400 or 500 quid a year, I would imagine. It's got to be that sort of figure. So 400 or 500. Then when you think we're actually giving government support, which, by the way, has been brilliant, the financial support we've given to families, struggling families throughout the country, you know, let's pat ourselves on the back for that as well. But we actually, at the same time, levying people on their energy and taking that back. Now, I've got a solution to this, and I did put it to a previous minister, but he said a couple of words to me, and I can't remember what they were. But I think we should have an opt-in, opt-out on our fuel bills. If you want to pay the levy, you tick that box. If you don't want to pay it, tick that box. And I suspect out of 650 MPs in that place, they probably won't tick that box to pay it, and that's the Green MP. So look, if we became net zero tomorrow, this country, this great country of ours, or if this island sank into the sea, it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference to the world's atmosphere, because there are no such thing as environmental borders. The atmosphere doesn't stop on our shores. I wish it did, but it doesn't. You know, you've got countries like Canada and India and America and Russia pumping all this carbon into the atmosphere, and we're trying to do the right thing. It's a world problem, it needs a world solution, and we need to work together. And I really struggle to support stuff. I support the net zero journey, the time frame and the cost, because let's remember, every single massive project we've undertaken over hundreds of years, whether it be the canals, whether it be the railways, whether it be the aqueducts, the viaducts, the Channel Tunnel, every HS2, every single project goes over budget, and not one politician over there can put their hand on their heart and tell you how much it's going to cost the country and ultimately you. Thank you.
Lee, thank you very much indeed. And now for our final speaker, who I suspect will be known to most of you in the room, please give a very warm welcome to the woman whose ideas and vision has inspired the creation of the popular Conservative movement. Please welcome our former Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
Well, good morning, everybody. Fantastic to see so many of you here this morning. And I think it's fair to say, over the past 14 years, Conservative governments have had many achievements. We've delivered Brexit, we've delivered new trade policies, we've improved our education system, we've kept Jeremy Corbyn out of office. But if all of us are being honest in this room, we've been swimming against the tide when we're talking about Conservative values. Whether it's what's going on in our schools and the fact that wokeism seems to be on the curriculum, and in our universities and in our corporate sector, there seems to be confusion about basic biological issues like what is a woman. Or if we look at the net zero zealots that Lee has just been talking about, the need for cheaper energy is being drowned out by some very active campaigners. Or if we look at government. Now, government is currently 46% of our GDP. We've got more than 500 quangos in Britain. You might think we've got enough government, but no, if you listen to the Today programme, I don't recommend it, but if you listen to the Today programme every morning, you will hear demands for more regulation, more taxes, and more public spending. And as for immigration, we know as MPs that people want to see lower legal immigration. And we know that people want illegal immigrants deported. And yet, however hard the government tries, it seems to be very, very difficult, and they are constantly being stymied. So why is this? Why have we got into this position? And I believe the fundamental issue is that for years and years and years, and I think it goes back 2 decades, Conservatives have not taken on the left-wing extremists. Now, these people have repurposed themselves. They don't admit they're socialists or communists anymore. They say they're environmentalists. They say that they're in favour of helping people across all communities. They are in favour of supporting LGBT people or groups of ethnic minorities. So they no longer admit that they are collectivists, but that is what their ideology is about. It's all about taking power away from people and families and giving power to the state or unaccountable bodies. And the problem is that Conservatives have tried to appease these people. We've tried to triangulate. Conservative cabinet ministers have met Greta Thunberg and asked her what she wanted. We've had Conservative governments legislating for self-identification. Now, I'm pleased to say we've stopped that legislation now. But this is a Conservative government allowing people to define themselves whether or not they're a man or a woman, something which we know is a biological fact. And we've had pandering to the anti-capitalists as well, in terms of regulating business, regulating landlords, regulating small enterprises. And the problem is that when we don't know what we stand for, when we're not prepared to stand up for conservative values, who is? And that has meant the landscape has shifted to the left. And I'm afraid, as Lee mentioned, too many of our colleagues are looking to what job they might get after they leave Parliament. They're looking to being popular at London dinner parties. I never get invited to any London dinner parties, so it's not an issue. It's not an issue for me. Oh, I feel some invitations coming on after that. But people don't want to be unpopular. But the irony is that these policies are popular. When I go out canvassing, and I'm very pleased to see some of my excellent canvassing team here today, when I go out canvassing in Norfolk, people want us to deal with immigration. They don't like net zero policies that make energy more expensive. They think the wokery that's going on is nonsense. And they are frustrated that they feel unable to say what they think. So there is a damaging divide between those who are making the decisions, those in the elite around the M25, and those people on the ground. I'm afraid we have not taken on the left enough. And the left don't just compete with us at the ballot box now. They also work to take over our institutions. And we've seen that. We see it in much of the media. We see it in corporations. We see it most of all in the quangos and government bureaucracy that emerged under Tony Blair. But we didn't do enough to change it. We didn't do enough to take the power back. And Jacob makes a very good point about the legal system. But that is true with the Environment Agency, it's true with Natural England, it's true with the Office of Budget Responsibility, it's true with the Post Office. This is a problem that goes wider than just one government department. It goes right to the way we do government overall. And what that means is it means that the people making decisions aren't elected. And I know, having spent 10 years as in the government, as a minister and ultimately as Prime Minister, that often as a minister in Britain, you have responsibility without having power. And that is a huge issue. It's a diminution of parliamentary sovereignty, which is what has made Britain a great country. Because we have such a direct link from members of Parliament to the people that vote for us, they are able to kick us out. I mean, none of us are saying, by the way, that MPs are brilliant or infallible. But we certainly are ejectable. And I myself have been at the sharp end of that. So I can tell you we are deeply accountable. And what happens when decisions are made by people who aren't accountable? Well, over time, they drift to listening to the vested interests, listening to those that advocate the status quo. They become out of touch with what ordinary citizens across Britain want. And by the way, the answer to this is not a Labour government, far from it. What we know is that Keir Starmer would enhance the power of these so-called independent bodies. He'd enhance the power of these quangos. He'd outsource more decision-making to his friends in Islington, which is where a lot of them live. And we would find it even harder for us to get the conservative policies that will really help transform our country. And that is what we need to do. But what I really want to say to people today, and I'm so delighted to be joined by such a fantastic array of colleagues and future colleagues, is it's not just enough to will the answers. You know, you can watch GB News or you can read the Telegraph and you can hear people talking about brilliant policies every day. Why don't we do this to cut immigration? Why don't we do this to reform the city? Why don't we do this to improve education? It's not enough to just have the policies when the system is actively working to stop those policies happen. Conservatives really need to be thinking about how we change the system itself and how we create the political weather that enable these policies to happen. Because it's difficult being a Conservative at the moment. It's difficult advocating these causes. And it's why we need a popular conservative movement to actually challenge from below what is happening in our country. And that's why I'm so delighted that Mark has taken on the mantle of leading popular conservatism. And there are three things I think we need to achieve. First of all, we need to make the case for democratic accountability. The fact is that democracy has become unfashionable. If you ask the under-30s what they think of democracy, there's not a very polite response. But we know it's the only way to deliver effective government, effective policies, and our fundamental freedoms as British people. And we need to restore faith in democracy, and we can only do that by restoring democratic accountability. The second thing we need to do is galvanise our conservative forces. Now, Britain is full of secret conservatives, people who agree with us but don't want to admit it because they think it's not acceptable in their place of work, it's not acceptable at their school. And people who are prepared to put their heads above the parapet and come out and stand as Conservative candidates, make Conservative arguments, are vitally important. So this organisation is not just about the members of Parliament. It's not just about the parliamentary candidates. It's actually about all of you and supporting all of you to be prepared to go and make those arguments with your friends and colleagues. We need to provide each other with support because the left is tough. You know, they tried to drown us out, literally, in the case of Steve Bray. And we have to have resilience and bravery to take on that fight. And the final thing we need to do is communicate with the public about our policies in an effective way. And I think Lee hits the nail on the head here. We need to communicate and show how people's lives will be improved by these policies. Too much time is spent talking about personality issues in the Westminster bubble. That's not what people want to hear. What people want to hear is how are we going to help them make their own lives better? How are we going to help make Britain more successful? How are we going to defend our country? Now, this fight is not going to be easy. The left have been on the march. They've been on the march in our institutions. They've been on the march in our corporate world. They're on the march globally. They are actively organising. But I believe this fight's important because I believe it's only through conservative values that we will give the people of Britain what they want. I feel it's only through conservative values that we will ensure the successful future of our nation. And I think the successful future of Britain is vitally important for the successful future of the West. So please join our organisation, get involved. This is just the beginning. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Liz, and to our fantastic lineup of speakers. I should also say we were hoping to hear today from Jack Rankin, who is the Conservative prospective parliamentary candidate for Windsor. But we heard last night, sadly, he couldn't join us because his wife has gone into labour. I should clarify, his wife is giving birth. She hasn't hooked up with Keir Starmer. His wife is giving birth, sorry. I just want to finish with a little bit of what happens next. Today, we wanted to just give you an outline of the PopCon narrative, our broad brush analysis. And it's perhaps one that's intellectually challenging, or maybe it's better to say historically unusual for Conservatives. Typically, Conservatives have sought to work with the prevailing grain, to lean towards protecting and even safeguarding institutions which have grown up and evolved over time. But I think that, my friends, is going to have to change. That doesn't entail reckless barbarianism. It doesn't mean you should never, ever listen to an expert. But it does mean we should expect experts should typically offer advice, not wield untrammelled power. So we are now going to embark on a mission to reach out to Conservatives across the country, whether they are presently members of the Conservative Party or not, who share our analysis. And sunlight being the very best of disinfectants, PopCon will be shining a light on how the present bureaucratic structures of the UK too often let down the people. And we'll have a book with these key ideas coming out in June. A great restoration and reset of how the machinery of government operates is likely a prerequisite for achieving the ends Conservatives agree on. We don't need or want to whip up anger, but we do need to channel and understand the widespread disillusionment that exists in Britain today. If we can do that successfully, we can have every confidence that we can make conservatism truly popular once again. But I want to end with an apology. For those of you who are Times readers, a newspaper of record, of course, you may have noticed that their cartoons today suggested there would only be 6 of us meeting in a broom cupboard. But in a show of PopCon's defiance of the regulatory state, as those of you here can see, we've pretty much breached fire regulations in getting so many of you into this room. So my apology for those who are standing. My apologies to the many hundreds of you who applied for a ticket who we couldn't actually get in. We could have filled a room with a capacity of over 1,000 people. So as far as the popular Conservative movement is concerned on our launch day, I'm going to end with a quote from the greatest movie of all time, Jaws, when Captain Quint says, "Next time, we're going to need a bigger boat." Thank you for joining us. Sign up on our website. Have a great day.